Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and submit extraneous materials.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, I appreciate the time to stand before the House here this afternoon and talk about some issues that are not only important to my district in Northern California, to a couple of our key industries, but really they are important to all Americans because this is a life-sustaining topic we're talking about, and that's food, energy, shelter. So we have that in abundance in California when we were allowed to produce the things that cause those to happen. So in my Northern California district, we have much agriculture. We have also an amazing natural water supply and the opportunities that come with that by harnessing that water supply for food, for water for agriculture, for food for people, for hydroelectric power, to make electricity, keep the lights on in places like this and all over America, to mine the minerals that we need to produce all matter of things. These come from the natural resources we have in Northern California or Minnesota or all over this country. And so we've been successful in developing them and making them real since the founding of this country. We've fallen on hard times more recently, though, with regulations that, although maybe well-founded, well-minded 50 years ago, have been turned on their ear and worked against good management of our forest lands, the extraction of minerals we need to sustain some of the ideals we have going forward for the future, the water supply for agriculture, for this country that has always known plenty, and these days is actually seeing at some points empty shelves in our grocery stores in the United States. It reminds me of a story that when Russian President Boris Yeltsin was visiting this country with President Bush 41, they had gone to Houston, I believe, to the Space Center and had left, and we're driving down the road and he saw a supermarket and he hadn't been in an American supermarket before. So they wanted to just pop in random with the president, and then with the president of Russia, to see what it looked like. President Yeltsin was amazed by the products that we have on the shelves in American stores. Not only that, but that people were freely and casually purchasing them. Not in a frenzy like, oh, this is the day the food comes in, everybody has to rush in and stand in line and rush out before it's all gone. No, easily coming and going, taking what they need, purchasing it at the register, and walking on out. All variety of the same kind, all fresh, all high quality. And that's what the United States has been able to bring itself to over all these years. And now that seems to be in peril. And a key part of that in my home state of California is that water supply. So I'll touch upon that here a little bit. What we have in the Northern California district that I represent, and also on the Oregon side, which my colleague Mr. Bentz represents above this line here in Oregon, is the Klamath Basin, the Klamath River. Now, that's a natural lake formed at the beginning of time of this planet, but also it's been enhanced about 110 years ago through a federal project. It yielded an additional 7 feet of elevation and approximately 400,000 new acre feet of water supply that was intended when that federal project was built to be agricultural water. So back in 1906 when they created it, it made possible 1,400 farms and 200,000 acres of prime ag land. Under federal law, under the Reclamation Act, and state law, all the stored water, the newly created water, it's called stored water, in the Upper Klamath Lake, which was above the natural level of the existing lake. That was the stored water. So when it is full, again, there's 400,000 acre feet of water, new water, but despite the clear law of the federal government, they've been taking advantage of the farmers year after year by mismanaging the lake and shifting that clear water right, as adjudicated by Oregon courts, to environmental purpose, to other purpose. The water would not exist had not that project been built and paid for over the years by the farmers in that basin. So what do we have? In 2022, the federal government even cut off water that could have gone to finish the crop year. They eliminated 50,000 acre-feet of legally available water to farmers. And the really maddening thing is at the end of the season, there was a surplus of water in the lake above what was needed to sustain what is known as a biological opinion, to sustain the fish needs in the lake as well as what had been sent down the river for salmon needs. There was extra water. We saw it ahead of time, yet they would not yield that additional water so that we could finish the crop year on some of the needed crops that are planted up there. They plant all sorts of things up in that basin. So one of them would be the potatoes that they grow up there. They needed just a couple more weeks of water supply that was available, and instead they were allowed to die off. So a normal healthy potato ended up being about the size of my pinky and obviously unharvestable and unusable. All because they wouldn't really listen to the projections that there would have been extra water. Nope, they wanted to start their new water year 2023 in 2022 on the backs of a water supply that doesn't belong to the federal government. It's clearly for the farmers of the basin, created after World War I and World War II for returning veterans to be able to set up shop and do that. The federal government made this choice. So what do we see? This during the time for prices of food that are skyrocketing around the country. Consumers are finding these prices going up and shelves becoming more bare more often than we should even see in this country. So what else do we see? Depriving the farms of water. Here's another view of the basin here. A little more close-up of the various sumps and wildlife areas and the farmed land there. Kind of hard to tell from here at this distance, but indeed it's very comprehensive. And it's rather complicated. But you know, smart people have made that work over the years. Indeed, when the farms thrive, also the refuges thrive. So the negative effects have been made that the farms, when they don't get the water, the wildlife refuges in the area also lose access to the water that comes through that ag system and gets to them. In 2020, over 60,000 ducks died in the basin, in that Klamath refuge, due to avian botulism. I paid a visit up there to folks that were working with voluntarily and through Fish and Wildlife to help try and bridge the gap from the water supply that wasn't there in recovering ducks. I mean, it's pretty terrible to be, this is, I've seen these pictures here, fishing out dead ducks from the refuge. Down here in the bottom, this is one that we rescued that was really sick, but we took back to a center there where they were helping for the ducks that were recoverable to recover and turn them back loose. The picture up here shows just how ugly it is. So a thriving basin is a key part of the flyway all through the western states, including from Northern California on south. The flyway that's so key towards having the type of diversity of wildlife that is enjoyed all through the Sacramento Valley, the San Joaquin Valley, and other areas of Northern California, Oregon, Southern California, for sportsmen, for everybody. It doesn't happen when this is the policy of the federal government to basically take the water away from farms and the refuges. So as I mentioned, as affirmed by the courts in Oregon, where the lake lies, also a portion of the basin's on my side, which me and Mr. Bentz both represent, the stored water is indeed owned by the farmers solely for use of the Klamath project. They've paid for it, they continue to pay for its ongoing upkeep and improvement, even when they don't get the water delivered to them. Isn't that something? You get a bill, that's one thing, to have it for the maintenance and upkeep if you're getting to use the supply, getting to use the asset. They don't even get to use the asset half the time now, but they still get the bill for it. It would not exist other than for that 7-foot enhancement that created the 400,000 acre feet. So in 2022, they were initially going to get 0 water. They did find a way to increase it to 50,000 acre feet after some late storms, which is 12.5% of the allocation of their water right. There was extra water, as I mentioned, in the basin, in the lake, to be used in the basin at the end of the year, above an amount that the environmental biological opinion said had to be remaining in the lake. They chose not to give it out. In 21, they were given 66%, or 33,000 acre feet. In 2020, after some battling, they tried to pull the pin on them early in the spring after the farmers had planted. They did end up getting 140,000 acre feet, which is about 1/3 of their allocation. In 2019, which was an amazing water year in Northern California and other areas, they still received 92% of their allocation. Pretty good by these standards, but it still wasn't 100%. So downstream of that, on the complex Klamath River situation, is also 4 hydroelectric dams that California, Oregon, environmental groups, and others are all been conspiring for a long time to have removed. So think about that for a minute. Especially my home state of California, there's a big push in the whole country to convert everything to electricity in its energy source. Automobiles, you're hearing the big controversy over stoves right now, kitchen stoves. They want to, in my home state and in some cities, they're really pushing on getting rid of those. Now, most people I know that have gas stoves in their house, they really like them. It's really handy to regulate the temperature, the rate with which the heat comes up on what you're cooking there. You can see the flame. First Lady Joe Biden, there's a photograph of her using one in her own kitchen in the White House. But they want to take this away. It's going to have to be replaced by electrical appliances, electrical automobiles, electric yard tools such as leaf blowers and lawnmowers. I still chuckle at the idea that they're trying to ban in California gas generators. I'll think about that for a minute. A generator is something you use a lot of times in an emergency for a home or a business, a lot of other purposes as well for them, but a lot of people use them as an emergency when the power goes out. Well, if you don't have a gas or diesel powered generator, what are you supposed to go to when the power goes out if you need turned on? Many hospitals, rest homes, things like that, they'll have a diesel-powered backup generator. Well, they're constantly under the gun by an air quality group, even though they rarely have to use it. It's like, this is not compliant. You need to replace that or get rid of it. So when we keep banning sources that are fuel-sourced appliances like this and turn to more electrification, so where are you going to get the electricity? Especially in my home state of California, which the grid is, on any given hot day, might be on the edge of shutting down. They have arrangements with the power companies that large manufacturers have pre-agreed agreements, I'll say, that they should shut down when the grid gets tough on a really hot day and the electrical load that everybody's pulling is about to break the grid. So you'll have people having to shut down their businesses, shut down manufacturing, shut down a cement plant, whatever it might be, due to a pre-arrangement, because we can't keep the power supply up where it needs to be. And they don't really have replacements. So that's expensive for jobs. It's expensive to stop your business. It's going to be expensive for the ratepayers to have to bear the brunt of that as well, that use electricity other than those businesses. So we want to convert everything to electricity, huh? I mean, we had a last-minute intervention in the California legislature to extend the life of the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant by an additional 5 years. They were slated to shut it down, 2 reactors, one in 24, one in 25. That plant alone is 9% of the power grid. How do you take a 9% chunk out of something that is already teetering on the edge of failing? Well, a similar case up here on the Klamath River. The 4 hydroelectric dams, one is on the Oregon side, Mr. Bentz's district, the other 3 are on my side in California, in Siskiyou County. They're hell-bent on getting them out. They think they've got it done. Well, we're here to say no, because we need the power supply and many other aspects of those dams that are important for the area. Indeed, the local folks have had 2 different measures in the county on the Oregon side and Siskiyou County on the California side, by well over 70%, an advisory vote saying, please keep the dams in place, they're important. Siskiyou County voted 79% for that. This course of action, of course, was based on one single study that supposedly showed that the dams are contributing to high water temperatures and reduced flows, which are causing fish populations in the river to decline, especially the salmon. This is at the same time. Okay, you got dams, deep water in them, right? On Lake Shasta and others, Lake Almanor, I think soon Lake Oroville, they're requiring the lake on Lake Shasta to be kept deeper so the water stays colder longer into the year so they can release colder water for the fish in the fall and early winter. So it's all about cold water by keeping the lake deep. But you take these dams out that have water stored behind them, you no longer have that deeper pool of water. They're trying to blame the dams with deeper pools of water for somehow raising the temperature. I mean, both sides of the mouth on these arguments here. This all came from a master's thesis by a government employee, not peer-reviewed. It contained no in-field research. Now, a former EPA science integrity officer, actually during the Obama era, a man named Paul Hauser, he was tasked with reviewing all these efforts for the Klamath Dam possible removal. His conclusion, again, the EPA science integrity officer said it would be the worst of all outcomes to remove these hydroelectric dams. Worst outcome for a lot of reasons, including environmental. The 3 hydroelectric dams are the biggest taxpayers in the county on the Siskiyou County, California side. Removing them will cause a huge hole in the budget of an already struggling county, which has had its timber business decimated, the mining business decimated. These large landholders, these large assets are fairly lucrative for the county. So when you couple that with already expensive energy in California, and probably a lot of the country, this doesn't make any sense. Because this is, green renewable power. When the rain falls behind a dam, that's renewable. Doesn't require a fuel source. That is the fuel source. Yet, of course, in my crazy state, it's not recognized as renewable if the size of the power plant is above 30 megawatts. Doesn't mean anything. But we're all here about, well, we need green power. I guess that can only mean windmills and solar panels. Yet try and get a permit. One group over here, environmental group, says, hey, we want these solar panels. They're the greatest thing. Or the windmills. And the other groups, maybe rightly so, are saying like, well, if we're going to cover 1,000 acres of solar panels, we can't stand by and allow that to happen. It might affect the desert tortoise. Or we know the windmills chop up birds, sometimes falcons, sometimes endangered hawks, even eagles, stuff people care about. And they're not really very reliable sources of power. Indeed, some days in California, because of an anomaly where there might be too much power coming off those grids due to the way the load is managed, they'll find themselves having to pay people to take that power because they can't just easily shut it off. It's strange thinking. I'm appalled that this is the way we've allowed ourselves in California to be forced into by the ideal of green power. So what does that mean? Everything else becomes a peaker plant. Peaker plants got talked about a lot 20 years ago in California, 25, when we had other energy crises. So a peaker plant was supposed to help supplement what the grid might not be fulfilling normally. So Indeed, the peaker plants are going to become the hydroelectric plants and natural gas plants because they want to go so far and wide with solar and wind that you know you can't count on them at night or when the wind's not blowing. Or, funny enough, if the wind is blowing too fast, they have to shut the windmills down. So our electrical situation in the state is already in peril. Removing these hydroelectric dams means about 70,000 homes worth of power that goes off the grid, and a whole host of other things. It will destroy the current ecosystem habitat, including some endangered species, the spawning grounds, by releasing, get this, 20 million cubic yards of toxic, some of it possibly toxic material. Indeed, silt. These dams have a lot of silt behind them that's accumulated over the years. They don't really have an explanation for what's going to happen with it or how it's going to be disposed of. They're just going to release it into the river. If you ever hear anybody talk about turbidity from a slight action going on in the river, you got to get a permit to do the slightest thing in a river, whether it's a gravel plant or doing something to clean up the river, having to move some material because of flooding, because of silt in other situations. They have months and months or years to get a permit just to move a little bit of material out. And they say, oh, this is okay. We're going to unleash 20 million cubic yards down the Klamath River. The turbidity, which makes it hard for spawning, it's hypocrisy. So one of the other effects will be lowering the water table underneath the ground or near the dams. They've helped build up the water table. So underground water table will be negatively affected by their removal. It will remove flood control capability that is important for the communities nearby. The dams are a good way to absorb that water supply. If too much should happen to come from a heavy rainfall, they provide flexibility. They remove the ability to control the river and have a flush flow if you need in order to move some material, or should it be for a fish need or other things downriver. That flexibility is taken away by the removal of the dams. Of course, as I mentioned, it takes the hydroelectric power capacity away for the users of the power and those that benefit from the income from it, including the county of Siskiyou. It'll cost possibly the taxpayers of California, who in a water bond put forward $250 million for the tearing down of dams. This is a water bond that builds water supply, that builds water storage, but it had that provision in there. $250 million of California taxpayer money to help tear down the dams. And the ratepayers from the utility, mostly on the Oregon side, also had to front $200 million through a surcharge on their electricity. A total of about $450 million raised. Well, magically, when they were putting forth the proposal to FERC, what it will cost to remove the dams, it came in just under $450 million. Well, they've already wasted about 40, maybe up to $50 million talking about it, so they're down to an amount of about somewhere around $400 million left of that fund. When they remove a dam, they find a lot of things that they didn't count on, including much more silt. And up in Washington, I think it was, they found triple the amount of silt that they had expected. So instead of 20 million, it could be 60 million cubic yards of silt polluting the river for how long? Who knows? How long will it take? The one in Washington, I think, was only about a 12 or 13 mile from where the dam is to the sea, where you'd have to push the silt. On the Klamath, it's somewhere 120 to 150 miles, depending how the meander of the silt going all through that. And the life cycle of a salmon is 3 years. So will there be enough salmon that make it back through this turbid water over that 3-year period to actually have the species that all the fuss is over? This removal will diminish the value of Siskiyou County property owners by about $1.5 billion, therefore lowering the tax rolls to the county. Electrical rates will have to go up, and the power supply will be even more uncertain. Now, speaking about Mr. Hauser a moment ago and the study he made on removing the dams being the worst option, well, for putting out that truth, he was fired by EPA Administrator Gina McCarthy at the time. So I guess they didn't really want the truth out there. They just wanted one paper that they've hinged all this on since that time. The 20 million cubic yards, which might be triple that, who knows? It's about the equivalent of one dump truck of material every minute of every day for 6 years being dumped in the river. Now imagine the fine if you accidentally put a little bit of silt in the river or a stream, under like waters of the United States, for example, which we'll talk about here in a minute. Imagine how you'd be fined otherwise for a private party doing that. The salmon hatcheries downstream will be destroyed as part of the removal. The salmon hatcheries that we're talking about are responsible for more smolts being raised than actually what the river has ever made. Under one of the dams, there's a ridge, a natural ridge that was there that is much higher than the river level that no fish would have ever gotten over to begin with. They don't want to talk about that because they believe that the fish were getting all the way up the additional 60, 70, 80 miles to Klamath Lake. Bad information. Now they're trying to somehow cover over that in the dam destruction, that they can maybe get rid of that ridge and have it act like it would have been fish passage from the beginning of time. So it will do a lot to hurt the economy of the county, local agriculture, the flood control, many things up in that area. There would be uncertainty when the river system would ever return to normal. It would result at the mouth of the river, at the ocean, underwater contamination at the Humboldt County estuary, which means basically loss of seabed life with all that material now being released, with who knows what's in it. This removal would even cause a violation of the Wild and Scenic River Act. Siskiyou County's governance over water would be lost. What are they going to do to replace the salmon? With the hatchery gone, the actual hatchery that's down below the lowest dam. Of course, the loss of recreation, land value, the lake time use on those lakes, again, tax revenue to the county, and the replacement water. Where the farmers and ranchers going to get that replacement water due to the lower groundwater status? So there's not a whole lot of good that comes from tearing down these dams that were there for a good economic purpose and actually do have ecological pluses as well. So moving farther south from the Klamath Basin, our water supply in California has been enhanced in the last century by some very forward-thinking projects. The State Water Project in the 50s and 60s, and the federal water known as the Central Valley Project in the 30s and 40s. So joining me here is my colleague from Central California, Mr. John Duarte, who's a farmer down there, as well as a nursery operator of many other nursery crops that we use to grow many tree crops, vines, etc. So the importance of the water supply to agriculture and to the people of California from these projects is incredible. So I'd like my colleague, Mr. Duarte, to offer whatever comments he would like to on this, on the water supply, on how he's been treated by government in his agriculture operations down in his direction in the Central Valley, as well as the portion in my district in Tehama County. Indeed, we have a mass amount of excellent and very valuable crops that are grown in California. Some of them Mr. Duarte is responsible for helping other farmers to have, and even grows himself. I happen to be a farmer in my real life too. And so we see the value of what is grown in California, and that's imperiled by government action. So Representative Duarte, please come on up and offer your thoughts on this.
Well, thank you, Representative Doug LaMalfa, and I couldn't agree with you more. California Central Valley, whether it be the Sacramento Valley where Doug serves and represents, or the South San Joaquin Valley where I serve and represent, is really where America finds its greatest abundance of its salad bowl, its fruit bowl, almonds, plant protein, walnuts, pistachios. California leads the world in production of all of these crops, and it really centers right in the Central Valley. And many of these water resources, whether you're north of Sacramento or south of Sacramento, share the same assets, the same infrastructure. So we've, after several years of devastating drought in California that has really hurt farm families and communities up and down our district, has, through acts of nature greatly, but also through mismanagement of our water resources and lack of infrastructure in California, has really cut the abundance that delivers nutrition and affordability to so many American working families who are suffering from high inflation, both the energy costs, their food costs, and in California particularly their housing costs, because we're simply not responding to the needs of our people as we need to. So in the last couple of days, after a very, very wet season and immense hope on the part of our farmers that relief is on the way, they would get water allocations, many farmers in Doug's in my district received a letter from the Bureau of Reclamation. The Bureau of Reclamation, in spite of historic rainfall, snowpack and flooding throughout California, is warning irrigation districts, farmers and ranchers that they may not get their water and should be prepared for reduced allocations and flow restrictions, which will threaten our food security. Now, these farmers are making plans today to plant rice, to plant tomatoes, to plant cotton, to plant vegetable crops. They're making decisions today as to whether they'll invest more inputs into their almond production, their walnut production, their pistachio production, based on what they think the market will bear for their crops when it's ready to harvest and sell, as well as what water they'll have to see those crops through the growing year with. And today they're getting very, very disturbing mixed messages from the Bureau of Reclamation. And so we should review what some of the facts are that the Bureau of Reclamation needs to look at while warning these farmers that even in this water-abundant year, they may not get their allocations. The current capacity and water outlook at Shasta Reservoir is the big reservoir in California. It's got 6 million acre-feet of storage capacity. Currently, it's at 2.7 million acre-feet, with inflows of over 14,000 acre-feet a day coming in. The Shasta Reservoir has more than 1 million acre-feet in storage this year than it did to this time last year. The current snowpack in California, now we're all waiting for the snowpack to come down and fill the reservoir, but we can model how the reservoir will fill based on the snowpack this year. The Sierra snowpack accounts for 1/3 of California's water supply, and the second snow survey from the Department of Water Resources was conducted on February 1st. So we're waiting with anticipation with what the March 1st Sierra snowpack report will bring, but we know from the precipitation events over the last month, it's going to be substantially higher. Nonetheless, the snowpack as of February 1st of this year was 205% of average up to that date. It contains over 33.7 inches of water, or 205% the average of water content of what we normally have up to that date. We know the daily snow sensor report of February 28th per the California Department of Water Resources shows the snow water equivalent at each of the reporting stations feeding into the Sacramento River, which supplies Lake Shasta. All of these stations are over 100% of normal snow water content. And throughout California, in the same report, there are 131 stations with all but 4 reporting a snow water equivalent percentage higher than 100% of normal. At Mount Shasta, which feeds the Central Valley Project's largest reservoir, Shasta Lake, the 22-23 snowfall is 202% higher this far into the winter, with 97 inches of snowfall recorded. And as of February 27th of this year, just yesterday, Mount Shasta had received approximately 60 inches of snow in the past 3 days. That's 5 feet on top of the snowpack they already had. And yet, California farmers, food producers, the champions of abundance, are being told to keep their powder dry, not expect full water deliveries this year. Now, apparently, we still don't have enough water infrastructure in California, even with Shasta filling up, even with a snowpack set there to completely fill and top up our reservoirs throughout the state. even after the state failed to pump the delta and get that water, the flood waters taken out of the Central Valley, out of the delta, and into storage south of the delta earlier this year, we're still going to be topped up, and farmers cannot expect full allocations of their water this year. We need to be building dams. We need to be building reservoirs. We don't need to be tearing them down. And what Congressman LaMalfa has presented here today is an absolute insult to every working family in America who's having trouble affording the nutrition on their dinner plate that they could better afford just a few short years ago. This is going to be the first generation in American history, my prediction, where we will see the diverse nutrition of produce and protein taken off the American working family's dinner plate and reverting American families to more starch-based diets that go in the opposite direction of what every health nutritionist tells us we need to be doing with American food plans. So, abundance is affordability. We need a pro-human attitude towards our energy policies, towards our water policies, and towards our food policies here in America. I hope that the leaders the bureaucrats at Bureau of Reclamation will listen to Congressman LaMalfa today and heed his warning, because the American working family cannot take any more of this inflationary abuse of our natural resources. Thank you, Congressman LaMalfa. Glad to be here with you today.
I'm certainly glad you could join, and that you made it as a member of Congress, because you have a great story to tell.
Yes.
As a representative and as a farmer also. So we do have amazing abundant water in Northern California this year, where so much of it emanates and ends up, taking care of our part of the state and other parts of the state as well. With Shasta and Oroville. Oroville, I believe, will fill this year. It didn't look like that maybe a little while back, but it holds 3.5 million acre-feet of capacity. It's a good chance of filling. Lake Shasta is a little lagging behind that. But with the snowpack we're looking at, it could top off. It holds 4.5 million. It combined with the proposed Sites Reservoir project down the river would get us that 6 million number. But we have to build Sites Reservoir. It's been looked at for many, many years. It's been planned. The voters of California passed a bond for more. Remember the one I talked about a while ago that's going to use $250 million to tear out dams? Well, it also put forth a good amount of money to add to water storage. And so Sites Reservoir has been able to corral around $950 million of that $4 or $5 billion bond. The rest is going to other projects, it looks like. So we need to get this done. We need Governor Newsom, who expresses support for it, to get his bureaucrats to move on that and get the permits approved so we can start. If we'd had it this year, we would have had that dam nearly full at Sites Reservoir with all the amazing amount of water that we've had. So it's an issue of planning ahead like those before us used to do. So when they built the Central Valley Project, largely Mount Shasta, and the State Water Project, Oroville, and others, the Folsom Lake near Sacramento, it would fill up pretty rapidly this year with the snowpack. So we're doing pretty good. And I have to give credit where it's due. Thank you to the BOR for some of the settlement contractors, this particular group in my area that did get 100% allocation, okay? So they did right on that, based on how things are looking with the supply. But that's a narrow group. When Mr. Duarte talks about others that traditionally have grown 100% of their acres in normal-ish years, they've seen their permanent new normal is going to be 35% on a good year, perhaps. That isn't right. If we plan ahead and build the storage we need, which we know we can, we've done, and the plans are out there to do that. And when the Delta pumps that he spoke about weren't run at max capacity to help fill another reservoir known as the San Luis Reservoir towards the west side of the central part of the valley, that facility holds 2 million acre-feet. Right now, I think it's about at 75% full. It wasn't looking so good a while back until we had Mother Nature bless us with so much. But see, they weren't running the pumps as hard as they could. They have other biological opinions that say, well, you can't do this, can't do that. You got so much water in there, I don't see how it's going to negatively affect the fish, except somebody's waving a document saying, no, you can't do that. So we have to flush so much water through the delta that we could be capturing and not hurt a thing. by running those two sets of pumps, one federal, one state, and topping off San Luis Reservoir. Now, my neighbors might say, like, well, Doug, what do you care about San Luis Reservoir? It's way down past us. It can't possibly help us. Like, well, the more we enhance the supply of the whole state, the better we all are off. I want my neighbors down there to do well. I want my neighbors on the west side of the valley that got zero water. The west side of the Sacramento Valley, basically many, many acres had zero. Some of the districts I mentioned had up to 18%, which in some cases wasn't even usable to them. So we saw dry fields like we'd never seen. Never seen. And that ruins the economies of small towns. It ruins the habitat for the flyways I mentioned coming out of Klamath. I mean, there's no downside for having more water supply. I just saw recently where the city of Oakland has approved 25,000 new homes, okay? Well, California does have a housing crisis, so we need homes. But where's that water supply going to come from? It will need approximately 12,500 acre feet per year to sustain that amount of homes, if my numbers are right. Where's that going to come from? Magic? They're going to have to take it from somewhere. We need to build the supply so we continue to build the housing we need in the state. So, but John, you know, we both experience this at different parts of the state. We both see that what we're growing here is indeed valuable. These crops that we're talking about here, the country relies on them. Many of these crops, 100%, 90%, 99%, come from California. If we don't have this water, then the United States citizens don't have this food. It'll have to be imported, or it'll have to do without. You have to eat something else. Well, there isn't always something else if we're not planning for that. So it isn't just about Californians, a few farmers. It's about everybody. But tell them about what you've had to deal with on just trying to keep your operation going on a wheat field or an orchard, what have you.
So it's interesting at times to understand some of the investigations and things that we need to write new laws for. We claim we need to write new laws because one politician does this or his son does that. I say we can't possibly need new laws to prosecute some of this corruption. I was prosecuted for planting wheat in a wheat field during a global food crisis. My family purchased a property up in Tehama County in Congressman LaMalfa's district, planted wheat where wheat had been grown many times before. The Army Corps of Engineers thought we were doing something different. The field agent drove by and gave it a windshield test and said, hey, you're deep ripping. You're not ripping, cultivating 4 to 7 inches deep. You're cultivating 3 to 5 feet deep. No, we're not. Come out and look at it. Wouldn't come out, wouldn't look at it, wouldn't take our invitation. Next February, he files a cease and desist order and tells us we can't harvest our crop of wheat. We asked for a hearing. The Army Corps of Engineers didn't have time to give us a hearing. Barely had time to drive by and look at what they thought they saw at the windshield. The Pacific Legal Foundation, a pro bono civil rights law firm for many property owners and clients around America, representing the Sackett in the current WOTUS case at the Supreme Court, took up our case as a due process Fifth Amendment case. They can't tell you can't farm your land without giving you a hearing. Well, once that case started to progress forward, the Army Corps of Engineers went to the Department of Justice, and my family and I were prosecuted for planting wheat in a wheat field by the Department of Environment and Water of the Department of Justice under the Obama administration. We ended up never getting a trial. We were found guilty by an Obama-appointed judge in summary judgment. And without a single day in court, we're found to have violated the Clean Water Act because our tillage implement, quote, lifted soil several inches and moved it laterally several inches while entering a wetland vernal pool that had been farmed many times before with the same farming systems we employed. So America's food system is not only at risk because of water scarcity politics here in California or overregulation. America's food system is at risk because we have regulatory agencies waiting with bated breath to prosecute any American farmer that stands up for their property rights, their right to farm, their right to produce food for American families. It's a huge risk. Farmers all over America are making decisions how to avoid these entanglements, avoid a fight, not farm, unless prices are incredibly high, because it's just not worth it. Add in the risk of water supply, add in the risk of inadequate infrastructure, add in the risk of arbitrary bureaucrats making decisions right up until the last minute that affect our ability to plan our farming even for the next year. And our food supply in America is in peril. It's absolutely, unquestionably in peril, and we see it reflected in every grocery store across America today. The food inflation is crushing working families in America. Abundance is affordability. And until we become an abundant society, and we understand the farmers, the energy producers, to be the champions of abundance, and the regulators, the NGOs that would stop abundance any way they can, to be the lords of scarcity, American working families are going to pay the cost at the gas pump, they're going to pay the cost on their heating bill, they're going to pay their cost at the grocery store, they're going to suffer the housing inflation we've seen in California. In California, a working family is spending 30% of their income on food and 33% of their income on housing. There is nothing left for the other expenses they have in their lives. And this is all due to regulatory overload. We are overburdened by regulations, we are overburdened by restrictions of what we do, and the American working family is paying for it every day. So thank you, Congressman LaMalfa. Thank you for being a champion of abundance. Back in 2015, 16, 17, we were having our battles. Thank you for being here today. You're a friend of not only the farmer, you're a friend of the American working family and affordability and nutrition across the country.
Well, Mr. Duarte, I appreciate you and bringing this sad story forward. Indeed, being regulated for practices that are normal practices that are supposed to be exempt under the Clean Water Act, which was formed in the early 70s, that were reinterpreted under the Obama administration. They decided to reinterpret, and now it's a wider scope. We're having this battle right now in committee on transportation and infrastructure, this conversation where we're going to do a Congressional Review Act on the overreach of the regulation of waters in the United States, WOTUS. It's going to be in the Supreme Court soon. So it's important we get back to a level of regulation that's reasonable. Nobody wants to skirt reasonable environmental laws, reasonable usage of water, all the above. We all get that. But the bureaucracy, as John was saying, is just waiting to pounce upon you and level huge fines at people. He's not the only one in Tehama County that's faced this. I had one grower, this is some years ago, had a clover field that he wanted to re-level, and they show up there and say, oh, you can't do this, and they took at least 3 years, 3 crop years. He didn't need to use his land while the bureaucracy pontificated whether he was doing something right or wrong. I mean, he's owed compensation for that. And others for planting an orchard, changing their ground from one type of orchard to another. That's somehow now a new regulatable situation that is not meant. The Congress would not have had the guts to pass a Clean Water Act that did not have agricultural exemptions the way it was, as it was written. If they had not had those exemptions, there would have been a whole bunch ridden out of here on a rail had they been that abusive of farm policy and agriculture and the food supply. Yet they're getting away with it by a stroke of the pen by a bureaucracy, and it changes from administration. President Trump, he saw the wrong on this, and they were able to put through a modified policy on waters in the United States that actually was working, was reasonable, and Biden pushed it right out. So this is what we face now, is his agencies are pushing this new. Waters in the United States means every drop of water that falls from the sky is under the jurisdiction of the United States. Whether it's a puddle here, he talked about vernal pools, it might hold some water here for a little while. That's going to become a water of the United States. It used to be a term known as navigable waterways, navigable rivers. Well, if you can't run a boat up and down it, it's probably not really navigable, but they've expounded upon this definition so far and so wide that it works for the bureaucracy. To be able to attack growers, to attack landowners, fine them, seize things from them. And so the American people should be outraged by this because farmers are just trying to provide. 99% of them are doing things correctly. Yeah, you got your outliers that, try and do things on the edge, but they're caught up with pretty soon, whether it's peer pressure or the regulatory, reasonable regulations that should kick in. They're trying to provide good things for the American people. and they're made to feel like criminals. They're made to feel like, why should I even bother? So back in the 70s, it was kind of popular to say after the oil embargoes, if you like imported oil, you'll love imported food. Do we want to really rely on some of our same overseas partners for our food supply? Can you imagine trying to, Russia's grown a lot of wheat in the past. Do you want to buy Russian wheat? Ukraine, which is a good partner, it's part of the difficulty of wrestling with that situation. Ukraine is a major exporter of many agricultural crops and fertilizer, and heck, somebody I know had a breathing apparatus that was only made in Ukraine. They had to wait a long time to get parts for it. So, do we want to be reliant upon foreign sources for everything? China for pharmaceuticals? Well, we shouldn't put our food supply in that situation either. And we're on that road to do that due to lack of foresight, due to lack of the water storage. We could be building Sites Reservoir, 1.5 million acre feet. We need to keep chugging water into San Luis Reservoir, which holds 2 million acre feet. We could raise Shasta Dam 18 feet, which would yield 630,000 more acre feet. But this is a representation of the water that was wasted during this winter being allowed to run out the delta. And this is a snapshot in time here. We've got the upper delta running out to the ocean here. 6 million acre feet during that snapshot in time. What are we doing here? We're not helping ourselves. The economy is in a tough way, as Mr. Duarte mentioned. The costs for struggling families, for their housing costs and their food costs, almost envelops everything else. So where's the compassion for the American people on this? We seem to be focused on a lot of other things. There's environmental issues that are brought up, but show me where it actually is going to help the fish in the Klamath River. It isn't. A lot of these other environmental issues, it doesn't really. Since 1992, we've flushed hundreds of millions of acre feet out to the ocean through the delta. The delta smelt is almost non-existent now. They can't find it. When they do trawls for it, they cannot find it. So it's almost like more water has actually harmed that fish. They have other predatory fish that are non-native that are eating up all the salmon smolts there. We don't do the right things about it. We do the wrong things, and it penalizes good, honest, working people that are only trying to provide good things for the American people. So, John, we have to keep telling this story because a lot of folks are just not quite understanding it. They don't have time. They're too busy in their lives. And so for those that are viewing this today, I hope you'll take this to heart and have your representatives do things that are going to help our food supply in this country and help farmers, help people that generate electricity. These environmental issues, you only seem to hear one side of it. No, those dams are not bad. Dams are actually created for a good purpose. They don't yield the fish passage that is sometimes advertised. There's other remedies for that, but they're not allowed to come to the forefront. Can we build fish ladders around the dam? Heck, in some cases, they're trucking fish from here to there because of drought situations. So why don't we have alternatives to these ideas? This gets into a very important topic in my area too, forestry. We have overgrown forests that, instead of a healthy 50 to 70 adult trees per acre, they'll have 500, 600, even 1,000 trees per acre. So what's that mean? Well, fire danger, big time. In my district, there's fire after fire. Last year, 2022, we kind of dodged a lot of bullets there. 2021, I had a 1 million acre fire. I've got the poster of it here. You've seen it before. Anyway, it's devastating towards the landscape, towards the habitat, and it also affects the water supply because all this ash and silt washes into the water system and pollutes it. It makes hydroelectric plants sometimes unusable because there's so much stuff that came down from the mountainside into the rivers, into the lakes. We're not managing our forests properly. There's a federal nexus to that, U.S. Forest Service. The pace and scale with which they're doing things is way too slow to keep up with the amount of board feet that are growing every year. So how does that affect water? Not only water quality, but water supply, because the forest is sucking all the water in to have too many trees per acre. What, you want to cut all the trees, Mr. LaMalfa? That's what I hear sometimes when I talk to the urban reporters on it. Like, no, we're not cutting all the trees, we're thinning, we're managing. We're having the amount of trees per acre that are a ratio that's sustainable, that's healthy. And we're not doing that. The trees are out there growing right now. There's more, many-fold more board feet of trees that are being added to the supply every year than we're even coming close to harvesting. So that shows we're going backwards on that. So the pace and scale with which we manage our federal lands, and of course allow the permitting on private lands to not cut every tree from here to Oregon, but to manage them. That's the first thing the environmental groups will yell, oh, you guys are going to clear cut everything. You're going to devastate the landscape. Do you think what's happening now is good? A 1 million acre fire. Several of my towns don't exist anymore in Northern California. Many of you have heard of Paradise when maybe you've seen some of those videos where 90% of that town burned down and 85 people lost their lives, many barely escaped. Town of Greenville, my district, 75% gone. An adjacent town, Canyon Dam, completely gone in minutes. And there's more, up on the Klamath River even. Fire after fire, because our forests are not managed, because federal government can't get out of its own way to aggressively do what needs to be done. We're way behind. So it affects air quality. The air plume, the smoke that went up in a plume from my Dixie fire in my district came and settled over the East Coast. There was so much smoke. And it affected air quality, I believe here in Washington, all the way up to New York. People were advised not to go out and do athletic things because of air quality from a fire in my district. I'm sorry, we didn't want it to happen. But there it was, year after year, fire after fire. And so we need folks to be on our side on this thing. No, we don't want to wipe out the forest or cut down the owl or any of that stuff. The owls actually like a little room to fly between not overcrowded trees. It'll help our water supply. It'll help the health of the forest. It'll help not spend billions and billions in fire suppression every year once we're behind, endangering people's lives trying to put the fire out and flying the air tankers and all that being expended, all that fuel being expended trying to do that. And we're talking CO2. I have a CO2 poster over there as well. Thank you for helping out on that, John. When we're talking CO2, which everybody's scared to death of around here as being the major pollutant, more CO2 is released in those fires than like a year's worth of cars driving in LA, okay? So as this climate change, which is half the time what they're talking about on the other side of the aisle in order to scare people to death, CO2 represents only 0.04% of our atmosphere. And the U.S. is the country leading the way on actually lowering the number anyway. Yeah, we're going to export our jobs, export our industry to countries that are doing nothing about it. China laughs at us as they build another coal-fired power plant every week, every 2 weeks, whatever it is. And they'll say, oh, hey, you guys in America, you're not keeping up with the Paris Accords. And they keep cranking out more and more. It makes us look like a bunch of fools. And this climate change religion they're pushing is going to be really, really expensive. Watch out for these corporations that are pushing what's called an ESG policy. We acted on that this week here legislatively because it's going to make Americans uncompetitive in the areas of energy and everything else. So this is pie in the sky stuff they're pushing here. It's actually very harmful to America, which is always the innovator of the cleanest, best way of doing things. And we're always seeking to improve. We've got the best running car and truck engines, yet it's never enough for the regulators, including my home state, where 70,000 new trucks or currently used trucks up until January 1 now have to be sold or scrapped or something else. And therefore, people don't get the stuff delivered to the stores or their homes that they normally would. It's going to be more expensive. John, do you want to touch on that a little bit? Because what we got going in California on these regs is going to be emulated by the rest of the country. I heard somebody talk about the PRO Act here a minute ago. Well, in California, that was a bill that basically makes everybody have to be, instead of an independent contractor, part of a workforce or a union. So, I mean,
well, the other side of affordability is opportunity. And families can't make ends meet unless they have affordable food, affordable energy, affordable housing. And they can't do the best they can do without opportunity. And until America decides to take practical steps to power our grid, we're not going to have the industrial growth, we're not going to have the worker productivity, we're not going to have the opportunity that American families deserve. And I think Congressman LaMalfa makes a very clear case that other countries are happy to take those jobs, happy to provide their citizens with opportunities that American citizens won't have. As we look at our global food system that's based in California and throughout many states, a global food system will ship food to whoever can afford it best. And the emerging middle and upper classes in India and China, where they're running a carbon economy, where they're creating jobs, where their grid stays lit 24/7 and has plenty of room for industrial growth, is where we're seeing opportunity in work and opportunity in jobs, and it's where Americans are going to see their dinner
The gentleman's
flow
time
to.
has expired.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Madam
Doug?
Chair. I appreciate the time today, my colleague joining me. And we just want the American people to pay attention because this affects them. It isn't just for us to stand here and speak.
The gentleman's
for our
time
health.
has
Thank you.
expired.